They say every man has a breaking point. I never thought I'd find mine. I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't supposed to be here. But in Mexico, truth is whatever the right people say it is. I was a journalist, a damn good one. Spent years exposing corruption, cartels, and the politicians who made backdoor deals with them. I thought I was untouchable, that my work would protect me. But I was wrong. It started with warnings, anonymous calls telling me to back off, veiled threats, and hushed voices. Then came the messages. We know where your family lives. I should have listened. I should have left Mexico when I had the chance. But I didn't. And then they framed me. They found a dead official in a cheap hotel. Bullet in the head, drugs planted in the room. My fingerprints on the weapon, fake bank records showing bribes I never took. It didn't matter how many times I screamed that I was innocent. The verdict was already decided. 25 years. That's what the judge handed me. 25 years in Palacio de Lecumberri, the Black Palace. One of the oldest and most notorious prisons in Mexico. Once home to revolutionaries and political prisoners. Now just another hellhole controlled by the highest bidder. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I wouldn't survive 25 years. Lecumberri was a world of its own. The walls were crumbling, thick with mold, but still held the ghosts of the men who came before me. The cells were packed beyond capacity, 6 men stuffed into spaces meant for 2, the stench of sweat, piss, and desperation clinging to everything. It wasn't just the inmates you had to watch out for. The guards were worse. Some were corrupt, others just brutal. Some were both. But the real power in Lecumberri belonged to Los Zorros, an inmate-run gang that controlled everything inside these walls. Drugs, weapons, food, protection. If you weren't with them, you were against them. And I wasn't with them. I spent the first few weeks keeping my head down, watching, learning. The rules of this place weren't written anywhere, but if you broke them, you paid in blood. You never sat in another man's spot in the yard. You never spoke unless spoken to. And you never, ever showed weakness. The first time someone tested me, it was over food, a tray of rice and beans, barely enough to feed a child. I felt the stare before I saw him. Big guy, shaved head, scars on his knuckles. He wanted my meal. I had a choice. Give it up and be seen as weak, or fight back and risk everything. I chose to fight. I barely remember how it went down. Just the raw chaos of fists, the copper taste of blood in my mouth, the crack of my ribs as I hit the concrete. I lost, of course, but I didn't beg. I didn't scream. And in Lecumberri, that meant something. After that, they left me alone. But leaving me alone wasn't enough. I wasn't trying to survive here. I was trying to get out. The first time I met Carlos, he was fixing a broken water pipe in the courtyard. Carlos was an engineer before he got locked up, a man who understood the bones of this prison better than anyone. Rumor was he had tried to escape once before, nearly made it too. They caught him at the outer wall, broke 3 of his fingers as punishment. He watched me for a long time before he spoke. You're not like the others. I didn't answer. I didn't trust anyone yet. But Carlos wasn't done. You're not supposed to be here. He turned his wrench, testing the pipe. You want out. I should have lied. Should have said no. Instead, I said yes. Carlos nodded. Then you need to meet Miguel. Miguel was different. He wasn't just another inmate. He was connected. A bank robber before he got locked up, he still had people on the outside. That meant money. That meant favors. That meant possibilities. You really want to escape? Miguel asked me one night, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't hesitate. I'm getting out of here. One way or another. Miguel studied me for a moment, then smiled. Good, because I got a plan. And just like that, the pieces started falling into place. An escape from Lecumberri wasn't impossible. But it wasn't easy. We weren't going to dig tunnels or crawl through air vents. This wasn't a movie. The place was too old, too guarded, too corrupt. The real way out? Through the front gates. It sounded insane at first, but Miguel laid it out for me. Carlos knew the weak points in the prison's infrastructure. Miguel had guards on his payroll. And me? I was the perfect distraction. We spent weeks gathering intel, figuring out which guards could be bought, which ones needed to be removed. We tracked schedule rotations, vehicle movements, emergency protocols. Miguel bribed a clerk in the warden's office to get us access to official paperwork. Documents that, if forged correctly, could make us look like we belonged outside these walls. And me? I played the long game. I made myself useful. I fixed things in the workshops. I delivered messages for the guards. I let them think I was just another broken man serving his time. I needed them to trust me, because when the day came, when we made our move, no one could see it coming. The night before the escape, I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in 2 years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Tomorrow, it all went into motion. Tomorrow, I walked out of Leconberry, or died trying. Morning came slow. I lay on my cot, staring at the rust-stained ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of Leconberry waking up, the heavy clang of cell doors, the distant murmur of voices, the dull thud of boots on concrete. Today wasn't just another day. Today was the day everything changed. I sat up slowly, careful not to draw attention. Every movement mattered now. If I looked too eager, too tense, someone would notice. And in Leconberry, the wrong person noticing could get you killed. Carlos was already up, his back against the cold wall, staring ahead blankly. He didn't look at me, didn't say a word. He didn't have to. We both knew what was coming. Miguel's plan wasn't just an escape. It was a performance. And the first act started today. The setup was simple. Leconberry ran on order and bribes. If you knew how to disrupt the first and control the second, you could make anything happen. Step 1 was creating a problem. A big one. Something that would force the guards to shift their focus, long enough for us to slip through the cracks. And that's where the riot came in. The spark was planted a week ago. Miguel had passed word around to a few key inmates. Los Zorros, the gang that ran the inside of Leconberry, had been getting lazy, taking too much, giving too little. The other crews were getting restless. All they needed was a reason to push back. So we gave them one. A stolen shipment of cigarettes and food, meant for the gang leaders, suddenly went missing. No one knew where it was. No one wanted to take the blame. Tensions boiled. By this morning, the air was thick with violence. I saw it the second we stepped into the yard. A group of Sinaloa guys, standing tense by the weight benches, eyes locked on the Los Zorros enforcers near the fence. The usual hum of conversation was quieter. The guards, they felt it too. It was coming, and we were ready. Carlos nudged me as we walked toward the maintenance shed. 1 hour, maybe less. I nodded. By now, Miguel was already in place, working his angle. He had arranged a meeting with a friendly guard, someone on his payroll, just outside the warden's office. The plan was in motion. Leconberry didn't riot often. The last time it had happened, 3 men were killed, 2 were never found, and half the guard staff had been reassigned. That was years ago. The warden had made it clear another riot wouldn't be tolerated. But fear makes people sloppy. And that's exactly what we needed. 11:40 morgens. It started with a shove. 2 inmates, one from Sinaloa, one from Los Zorros, chest to chest, barking threats. A crowd formed fast. A punch, then another. And then the eruption. Men rushed forward, fists swinging, bodies crashing into each other. The yard exploded into violence. Guards rushed in, batons raised, barking orders no one listened to. The plan was working. While chaos swallowed the yard, Carlos and I slipped through the side gate, a blind spot we had been watching for weeks. No one saw us leave. We moved fast but controlled. The maintenance corridor was empty, just as planned. Carlos pulled out a stolen screwdriver, quickly unscrewing the panel covering the electrical access. Our target was the north sector, where Miguel was handling his part. Carlos worked fast, pulling at the old, frayed wiring behind the panel. Then, a spark. Power surged, and half the cameras in Leconberry went dark. It wouldn't last forever, maybe 5-10 minutes at most. But that was all we needed. Carlos glanced at me, breath short. Let's move. We ran. The riot had bought us time. Now we had to use it, because the next step, getting inside the warden's office. And that's where everything could go wrong. We ran through the maintenance corridor, the hum of flickering lights above us, our footsteps splashing against the damp concrete. The riot outside had turned into a full-blown war, the echoes of shouting and the sharp crack of batons against flesh filtering through the vents. The guards had lost control. That meant we had minutes, maybe less, before reinforcements stormed in and locked the whole place down. We reached the end of the corridor, where an old, rusted service door led into the administrative wing. Carlos glanced at me, gripping the stolen screwdriver like a weapon. His breathing was sharp, controlled. This was the moment. I twisted the handle. Locked. Carlos didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees, jamming the screwdriver into the old metal lock, his fingers working fast. The whole prison ran on outdated systems, patched together over decades of neglect. That was our advantage. He gritted his teeth. Come on, come on. A shout from behind us. Guards coming. Then, click. The door swung open. We slipped inside and shut it behind us, just as heavy boots stomped into the corridor we had left behind. We didn't breathe. Seconds passed. The guards hesitated outside, barking orders into their radios. Then, they ran the other way. They weren't looking for us. Not yet. I exhaled. Carlos wiped sweat from his forehead. Let's go. The administrative wing felt like another world. The hallways were clean, the walls lined with peeling posters about discipline and rehabilitation. Bullshit words that meant nothing in a place like Lecanberry. We moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. The power surge had cut the cameras in this section, but only for a few more minutes. Miguel was waiting in the warden's office, and he had the hardest job of all. The plan was insane. We weren't escaping through tunnels or sewer grates. We were walking straight out of Lecanberry. But to do that, we needed documents. Real ones. Miguel had been working for months, bribing clerks and forging paperwork. A transfer order for 2 high-value inmates. The warden had to sign it. That's where Miguel came in. We reached the office. The door was slightly open. Inside, I saw Miguel standing over the warden's desk, a pistol in his hand. The warden, a heavy-set man in his 50s, dressed in a sweat-stained white shirt, was frozen in his chair, his eyes wide with fear. His pen hovered over the transfer papers. Miguel turned his head slightly as we stepped inside, his face calm, steady, like he had done this 100 times before. The warden, however, looked like a man who had just stared death in the face. His thick fingers trembled around the pen, hovering over the transfer documents Miguel had spent months forging. Everything depended on him signing them. Carlos closed the door behind us, locking it. No turning back now. I stepped forward, slowly, watching the warden's hands. His breathing was sharp and uneven, sweat beading on his forehead. He was terrified, but not just of us. I know who you are, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They'll kill you before you even reach the gate. Miguel leaned in, pressing the pistol lightly against the warden's temple. If you don't sign those papers, amigo, you won't have to worry about them. The warden swallowed hard. I watched his eyes flick toward his desk drawer, where I knew he kept a panic button. We had 5 seconds before he made a decision. I stepped between him and Miguel. Listen to me, I said quietly. We're leaving this place. You sign that order, we walk out that door. No one gets hurt. No one even knows you were involved. The warden's lip twitched. His eyes darted to Carlos, then back to me. And if I say no? Miguel didn't hesitate. He grabbed the warden's wrist and slammed his hand onto the desk, pinning it down. The pen rattled against the wood. Then I blow your brains out, and we do this the messy way. The warden's breathing quickened. His eyes searched mine, looking for something, fear, doubt. But I didn't blink. Then, finally, his shoulders slumped. He picked up the pen and scrawled his signature across the transfer order. The moment the ink touched the page, I felt the weight of Lecanberry's walls loosen. Carlos snatched the papers and tucked them into his uniform. Miguel eased back, lowering the pistol. We're done here, I said. The warden nodded slowly, his jaw clenched tight. You have no idea what you're walking into. Miguel is Mirkev. That's tomorrow's problem. I reached for the door, but just as I turned the handle, the radio on the warden's desk crackled to life. Sir, we have a problem. Riot's spreading. We need authorization to lock down all wings. Carlos and I locked eyes. If the prison went into lockdown, the escape was over. Miguel leaned down and whispered into the warden's ear, his tone cold and final. You say anything besides affirmative, and I put a bullet in your skull. The warden hesitated for half a second too long. Miguel's finger tensed around the trigger. Affirmative. The warden finally rasped into the radio. Lock it down. The radio cut off. Miguel grinned. Good choice. We moved fast. We had minutes, maybe less, before the guards sealed every exit. The only way out now was through the front gates. And we weren't the only ones who knew it. The second we stepped out of the warden's office, the prison shifted. The distant chaos of the riot still echoed from the yard. But now there was something different in the air. An unease. A tension. They knew. Maybe not about us. Not yet. But the guards knew something was wrong. Miguel walked ahead, shoulders squared, the forged transfer papers tucked neatly into his uniform. Carlos and I flanked him, keeping pace, walking like we belonged there. That was the trick. We weren't sneaking. We weren't running. We were 3 inmates, dressed in stolen guard jackets, with signed paperwork that said we were supposed to be transferred out. And if we sold it, if we didn't break, it might actually work. We turned the last corner leading to processing, where transfers, releases, and special exits were handled. The guards inside weren't part of the riot response. They were desk men, used to pushing papers, not cracking skulls. That was the bet Miguel had made, and it had to pay off. Ahead of us, the final gate loomed, a massive, reinforced steel barrier, the last line between Lecumberri and the outside world. A single check-in desk stood in front of it, where a bored-looking officer leaned against the counter, flipping through a file. Miguel stepped forward, sliding the forged paperwork across the desk. "Transfer order," he said, his voice steady bored. Warden signed it himself. The officer barely looked up. He took the papers, thumbing through them lazily, then reached for his stamp. My breath caught. This was it. One stamp, one press of a button, and we were out. The officer raised the stamp, paused. Then his face twisted. I saw it the second he realized something was wrong. He frowned at the document's timestamp. Too fresh. His eyes flicked up, studying Miguel. Studying us. And in that moment, we lost it. His hand dropped toward his radio. Miguel moved first. The pistol flashed from his waistband. A single shot. Muffled. Close range. The officer jerked, his body slumping against the desk. Carlos and I froze. The echo of the suppressed gunshot barely had time to fade before Miguel grabbed the officer's ID badge and slammed it against the security panel. The final gate buzzed. Unlocked. Miguel spun to us. "Move. Now." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the gate, shoving it open, stepping out into the night for the first time in 2 years, and walked straight into hell. Spotlights. Sirens. Trucks. The entire front lot of Lecumberri was crawling with police. Miguel Kirst. Carlos grabbed my sleeve, his breath ragged. They knew. They *ING knew. **. The warden tipped them off. He had signed the papers, played along, done everything to make it look real, but he never planned on letting us walk away. And now? Now we were 3 men standing in the open, outside the most secure prison in Mexico, with nothing but a gun, a stolen badge, and seconds before the storm hit us. I looked at Miguel. What now? He exhaled. Then he grinned. We run. And we did.